Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. If you've been following this channel, you'll know that I have been working on a adaptation of a board game called Mini Rogue. Mini Rogue is a card-based sort of fantasy-themed game, and I'm working on a computer adaptation of it. And I'm changing the theme to science fiction. And I've done a little bit on that, so I wanted to show you that first of all, and then we'll discuss a particular thing about the code. Most of the code that I've used is using commands that I've already talked about in previous videos, so I don't want to go over everything that I've done, but I do want to go through one particular thing which I haven't talked about yet. So here we can see the beginning screen where we have a choice of whether we want a male or a female avatar. The only difference is what will display on the sidebar. It doesn't have any mechanical difference. So let's say we choose a female one. We click there and that makes that happen. And then we have a list of difficulties, and the difficulties will change what resources we start with. So let's say we choose the hard difficulty. We press the button to finalize our choice, and it comes up here telling us that we've got 0 force shields, 4 hull, 2 credits, 5 fuel, and 0 experience. And these numbers change depending on the difficulty that we choose, except for experience, which always starts at 0. And then we've got the cards, although these cards, I've just set this up to display the cards. They don't actually do anything mechanically yet because I haven't got to that. Just wanted to show you what they look like, basically. So the thing I wanted to talk about, which I haven't yet talked about, is these little circles that you click in to choose your avatar and the starting difficulty. They are called radio buttons. The reason that they're called radio buttons, that might be a bit obscure to younger people perhaps, the metaphor is that it's like you're tuning a radio. You can only sort of choose one frequency. As opposed to a set of checkboxes, you've probably seen checkboxes on the internet where you click in the box. It's like one of these but a square. And if you click in it, it ticks, and then if you click in it again, it unticks. The difference with checkboxes is each of them is separate. If I click this one, that doesn't turn that one off, and if I click in the left one, that doesn't turn the right one off. So those are useful for when you want to give the player or the user lots of different choices. This is something that you use where they only have one choice, and they're choosing between them. So it's more like a drop-down menu. You've probably seen drop-down menus where you click on a bar and you have a list of text, and then you have to pick one of the options that's displayed. In fact, more or less anything you can do with a drop-down menu, you can do with radio buttons. It's really just an aesthetic choice as to sort of what looks better on the screen. I just thought that working with fairly big pictures, radio buttons would look a bit better than having those pictures in a drop-down menu. That's really the only reason I used them. So let's talk about how radio buttons work. So I'll minimize the display, and we'll get into the actual code. So as I say, there's quite a large amount of new code here, but I don't want to talk about all of it. I only want to talk about radio buttons, which begin here. So because I wanted the male and the female I wanted it to be random whether the male was chosen or the female was chosen initially. That's why we have this. This is a little bit more complicated than it needs to be, just so that it mixes up that order. So we have a random choice. We either set Z to be equal to the character M and Y to be equal to the character F, or we set the other way around, Z equal to F and Y equal to M with an equal chance. So we say if random 1 to 2 is equal to 1, then do this, and otherwise do that. So that should happen 50% of the time, one should happen, and 50% of the time the other should happen. Then we have a table, and in the table we print one of the avatars, and then we print another one of the avatars. So this will print something like this. Oops, img art / avatar, and then it'll print z. So let's say z is m. It'll print m.png, and if z is m, then y would be f, and down here it would print that. So all this is saying is this is an image command. It says img, that's an image. Go to art / avatar m.png, which is, so avatar m is just the name of the picture of the male character, and print that up, and then down here find avatar f and print that one. And then below those two we have the radio buttons. So you'll notice that we have one variable that's in quotes and one variable that's not. So here's what this is saying, and I'll go through it sort of bit by bit. So less than, well, that tells you it's a Twine specific command. It's if there was only one of those, we'd know that it was from the HTML language, but this is two of them, and then two of them at the end, so we know that it's Twine. Radio button just tells you that's the sort of command this is going to be. This quote $G quote tells you that this particular radio button is choosing a value for the variable G. Then the Z is telling you that the initial, or that this choice is that G is going to be set to whatever the value of Z is, so M or F. So it'll be, this would be equivalent to something like this. Oops. So it'll be either equivalent to that, or it'll be equivalent to that. So that tells you this is a radio button. It is writing a value into the variable G. The value that it's writing in is the single character F. Now, it doesn't have to be a single character. I could have gone with that if I'd wanted to. I could also have gone with a numerical value. I could have done that, or a bigger number. But I found it easier to. I could have had like 1 and 2 instead of male and female, but I just found it easier for my memory to work with M and F. So in this particular case, it would be saying this radio button, if they click into it, it's writing the value of the single character F into the variable G, and it's checked. And what checked means is that initially this is the one that will be filled in. You probably remember that when we loaded it up, there was one already. We hadn't clicked anything, and there was one already filled in. And then this one down here is exactly the same, except it doesn't have that. Checked mark. So it's a radio button. It's writing a value into the variable $G, and if the user clicks this one, it'll write the value of the single character M into the variable G. And then once those are in the code, that'll display those two radio buttons with this one initially filled in. But you need another thing. You need this button to allow the user to finalize their choice and move on. And I have already talked about the button, because you use button as well in usually when you've got checkboxes or a drop-down menu. You also need a button. You can just use them as links as well if you wanted to. You could have a choose your own adventure style story where the links were all buttons instead of text if that looked better to you. But you certainly need one when you're using radio buttons. So we have button, just tells you that it's a button. choose your avatar, which is just the text that's going to be displayed inside the button, and then difficulty, which tells you where the program's going to go once the button is clicked. It's just saying once this button is clicked, go to the page difficulty, which is the next one along. And then we have this slash button, which says sort of end button. Now, why do you need a slash button? Well, because you can put stuff in here. You could put code in here that, like, let's say once the button was clicked, you wanted to set some variables to, stuff like that. You can have stuff that happens only when the button is pressed. But in this case, we don't have any sort of script that's going to happen when the button is pressed. So we just go straight from the button to slash button. Now, you might ask, what happens if you haven't chosen, what happens if you don't put checked in any of the options? Well, it doesn't generate an error. It should, in my opinion, but it doesn't. That's just the way it works. And what will happen is that the program will keep running. Let's say that I hadn't put checked there. That would show the same pictures, and then underneath the pictures would be the radio buttons. The only difference would be that neither of them would be filled in. And if I clicked on one of the buttons, then it would choose that one, and then if I click the other one, it would choose that one instead, and that would proceed the same way. But let's say I didn't choose either of those buttons, and I just I didn't choose either of those radio buttons, and I just choose the continue button. It would continue. It wouldn't generate an error. It would continue to difficulty without any value being written into the variable $G. So that would cause problems later down the road, of course, because the program assumes that you're going to choose one or the other. Because I've chosen checked, then that problem can't arise. But it won't generate an error if you don't have checked. So if you set up radio buttons and they're not working, or they're allowing you to continue, but then when you continue, weird stuff happens later on, make sure that you've made at least one of the options checked, because if you haven't, that can set up the possibility of errors later. I would, if it was sort of up to me, I'd have it generate an error straight away, so the programmer would know that option, that they'd made that mistake, and that there was that sort of vulnerability in the program. But as it happens, that isn't what happens. So let's go to, now the other thing you'll notice is that having difficulty as the destination doesn't make an arrow. It feels like there should be an arrow, like the arrow that goes from here to here. There should be an arrow between these two, and in fact there should be an arrow between these two as well. And there's not, and that's because having a button that sends you somewhere doesn't create an arrow on this screen. Unlike includes or go-tos or text links, it doesn't automatically. It doesn't create that arrow. So you're not doing anything wrong if you don't see the arrow, even though it looks like maybe you've made a mistake. So here we have more other radio buttons, and in this case I've got one of those situations where instead of printing something, I set a temporary variable to be equal to this long string, and then at the end I print the string. And the reason for doing that is because if I don't do it that way, if I had the prints sort of as I go, it doesn't interpret it properly. You have to do it all in one go. So this will make something like, this is a for loop that goes from 1 to 4, which is the different difficulties. And I have an array here which has the resources that you get for each difficulty. So for example, on the hard difficulty, you get 0 force shields. It says 0425, which means 0 force shields, 4 hull points, 2 credits, and 5 fuel. So we go through the difficulties. We print the name of the difficulty, so easy, hard, whatever it may be, and then next to that we have a radio button which will look something like this. Radio button This slash just means that the quote is part of the text and not the end of the text. So it'll be radio button Y and then plus Z, so it might be 2. And then if Z is equal to 2, we add the word checked. And then we print that plus those 2 greater thans, which close off the radio button. So it'll end up printing something like this, or it might print 1, it'll print 1 without, excuse me, sorry, I deleted the wrong thing there. It'll print 1 without the checked, then it'll print 2 with the checked, and then it'll print 3 without the checked, and then it'll print 4. So this just says it's a radio button. We're writing into the variable y, $y, and this time we're writing a numerical variable. So that variable can be a number or it can be text. It can be anything that can fit into one of these variables. And it's not checked, or in the case of 2, it is checked. It's checked for 2 specifically because 2 is normal difficulty, and it seemed more instinctive to me to have normal be the default choice. And as I've said before, you need to have a default choice, because if you don't, you set up the possibility of the program not working properly. And it won't print you an error. So that is radio buttons. As I said before, and then we have the button, which is the same as before. It says choose difficulty. That's the text that's in the button, and then setup is the name of the page to which it links. And if we wanted to, we could have some code in here, but I don't have any need for code in that particular place, so we just go straight to the slash button, and then it'll go to setup. So that is radio buttons. As I said before, they mostly do the same thing as drop-down menus. It's just a different just a different way to display what's basically the same choice. In the examples that I've given here, I only have one choice per screen, but that's not a requirement of the command. I could have had, down here, I could have had other radio buttons that are to do with different variables. I could have, let's have a variable for $H, and we have the variable 1 and 2. You can have any number of different variables that are written to on the one page. The only reason that I had I could have had these 2 choices on the same page with a single button. The only reason that I didn't do that was because on my my laptop screen it was a bit much for the screen. It went off the screen. That wouldn't have generated an error. There's no inherent reason why you can't have multiple choices, multiple different variables being written to with different sets of radio buttons and a single button at the end. So I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.